Welcome to the Poultry Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Mulnix, and I am recording today from the Animal Ag Tech Innovation Summit in Dallas, Texas. This is my first time actually recording from an event, which is pretty cool because today we're covering anything technology as it relates to all species. And with me today, I have William Herring, Vice President of Cobb-Vantress. William, welcome to the show.
Good morning and thank you.
William, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. First, good to be here. I've been in this role at Cobb for about 2.5 years. Lead Cobb's global research and development program, which includes all things genetic improvement. From a career perspective, I've started off in similar kinds of responsibilities, albeit at the university level in beef cattle genetics, then spent a big chunk of my career in pork production genetics, integrated pork genetics at Smithfield Foods, and then moved on to PIC in a similar role, and now working in broilers. So it's been fun to get experience and learn things as we move across the species with respect to genetic improvement.
That's quite the background. It's becoming all more familiar as folks kind of intertwine between the species because what you learn in one species can help, especially at some place like Cobb.
Sure. Well, and of course, the biology is different as we move between to some extent, but the way we go about genetic improvement is really practically all the same. And I would argue even as we look across crops, it's very similar. So we can apply all the same principles to make a better product for customers and consumers.
So, William, can you share a little bit about Cobb-Vantress?
Yeah, sure. Cobb-Vantress is one of really two leading global genetics companies in the area of broiler or chicken genetics. Cobb's been around for a very long time. We operate in all countries where there is broiler or chicken production and chicken consumed. We have very strong business across North, South America, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And our primary product is a genetic package for maximizing profitability for integrators and producers that ultimately is a satisfying product for consumers.
Excellent. Tell me about what your challenges are in R&D.
Yeah, I don't know that they're unique to Cobb, but we focus on really 3 primary strategies. And again, they're all centered around delivering the best genetic product and package to the customer within their region and really based on the type of product that they harvest, whether it's a lighter weight product or if it's a heavier weight product in North America that's more white meat yield driven. So we focus on 3 primary strategies. Number 1, and this would be relatively new to Cobb, it would be what I would call new product development. So we have spent an enormous amount of, I would say, effort and capital to get that effort underway, and you'll be seeing the fruits of that soon as we enter the market with new products. Secondly, a core strategy, and this should be part of any good agricultural genetics business, is around having the best science deployed around the ongoing genetic improvement program. So at the very top of the production pyramid, we have farms where birds are housed that we measure lots of things that don't get normally measured in commercial poultry production. Many times very labor intensive, but every bird that hatches ends up with its own unique, let's call it social security number or identification, and that bird gets tracked all the way through our system. We measure numerous things depending upon what that genetic line is targeted for, and then ultimately those data are instantaneously transferred to our quantitative sciences team where we turn that into genetic values for whatever the traits are. All of that information gets passed back to our sites and farms where our team members then use that information to determine which birds make it to the next generation. So there's a lot wound up within that. It's what you measure, how you measure it, the genotyping strategies you might take on, the genetic prediction statistical methods that you may or may not use to make the absolute best decisions to look into the crystal ball of that individual bird's DNA and decide who's worthy to create that next generation. So that's really strategy number 2. And then the third one is looking towards the future, and that's not a long time horizon, but as we go through agricultural genetic improvement, periodically there are breakthroughs that happen maybe in an adjacent space, maybe within your own space, that you need to be prepared to take advantage of. And that's where really the research portion comes in play, very much so. I'll use maybe some historical examples. If we go back to really kind of right after 2010, 2012, 2013, somewhere through there, the cost of genotyping came down quite a bit. The statistical ability to use genotyping with pedigree and what we were measuring really accelerated. And those two things came together, and Cobb and others across different species were trying to be ready to use that very quickly. Cobb did. Then there's been other things like CRISPR-Cas9 technology that provided some very interesting research tools, and we'll see where those go. So we invest internally within our own research team and also externally with collaborators from across the world every year to try and network with those that are really involved in some of the best science so that we're positioned to be a part of those discoveries and then determine if we want to bring them back in. So those three strategies, again, are around new product development, being the best in class and implementing the best science around ongoing genetic improvement, and really looking to the future of scientific breakthroughs, if you will, that are important to make a better product for our customers and ultimately for consumers.
So when you talk about new product, new technologies, what brings you to a tech summit like this?
You know, it's a great place to look across species and see who, and a lot of the participants here are early stage startup type of groups. Some of the things they're working on, how can we bring that back into a genetic improvement program? One of the areas that we remain highly invested in and beginning to deploy, I'd say more and more, is around what I call precision phenotyping. I use the example of 2010 plus, going back to that period of time where agriculture really stepped up its game using genotyping. That was a big, if you plot traits, we really moved traits at an accelerated scale using that technology. Part of that equation is how we measure things. As I mentioned before, we measure lots of different traits, all the way from things that impact morbidity and livability to simple things like growth rate, individual feed intake, different muscle yield variables, meat quality attributes, just anything that can be genetically controlled that ultimately contributes again to a customer experience or consumer experience. A number of those traits are honestly fairly difficult to measure, and I'll give you a couple of three examples. First, just as simple as the quality of the locomotion of a bird in this case, and I'd argue this is the same across all species. Historically, that's been a human kind of subjective scoring system. Pigs, cattle, and I would say poultry, which has been somewhat effective. So I'm not discounting what has been used, but it's clearly human-based and subjective. Today, we have projects underway where we use camera technology to watch the bird in its natural state, link that to an individual identification or that social security number of that bird, and monitor that bird as it moves freely around within the space that it's in. So if you imagine that video feed and all of that together, you can observe that bird through, honestly, artificial intelligence algorithms. We can take all of that information, and as a first step, we can train that back on a set of data based on those subjective scores. As a first step, we can do that very well. Ultimately, and this sounds a bit out there, but it is, I've seen it now in practice, we can then take that information to a next step, and the algorithms can actually break apart and segment the quality of that locomotion into ways that the human eye really has a challenge with. So it's a simple trait, but that trait itself contributes to the longevity of that individual bird. So that's one area. And we actually have a project underway doing that, and it happens to be with the University of Georgia and their Precision Livestock and Poultry group there in Athens. A second one is around male mating behavior. Why is that important? Well, for those that keep up with metrics across the industry, particularly within the U.S., what we've seen across the industry is that hatch has decreased year over year and is very impactful to ultimately the supply-demand picture. And there's a couple of major U.S. integrators that are publicly traded, and it gets mentioned in almost every quarterly earnings call. So it's all real. USDA data verifies this. I'd encourage you to look it up. So it's real, and it has an impact. Why is that? Well, a lot of what we select for is really driven around very efficient broiler production on the live side. Makes perfect sense. I think an unintended consequence of that is negative impact on reproduction ability. And part of that is, too, we really don't have a great way to accurately measure that at the individual male level. And that's, again, where this type of technology can come into place. We have a project in the latter stages with the University of Tennessee Precision Agricultural Group there in Knoxville, where we are doing that, again, using video feeds to monitor mating behavior and the quantity of that mating behavior and the quality of that behavior. So that would be a technology that we think would help assist in mitigating some of those things downstream. It would be not a technology we would necessarily implement very far downstream in terms of, deploying it, but certainly at our pedigree farms. We use a lot of CT imaging technology within all of our pedigree sites to assess a number of things that we use today, like yield, muscle yield, bone and joint health. But there are other areas like cardiovascular health that today we're using those same types of algorithms to deploy as part of our genetic selection and monitoring program. It's a project that we took on with Georgia Tech, with the Georgia Tech Research Institute. So kind of going back to that third strategy, really the second and third strategy of accurately measuring things and then partnering with the right folks to take us down that pathway.
It's so unique. I'm so used to layer and all the challenges within layers, but to hear what your challenges are in the broiler world and understanding that it's exciting that there's a lot of progress, I think, of the computing power and the genetics. And it took a lot of computing power to get that genome mapped and figured out. And, there was a lot of work around that just on the human side, let alone that transferred over to the other species, which is pretty cool. When it comes to Cobb's vision for innovation, you guys do these prototype farms or these test farms that get to try out different technologies. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, we do. We've shared it in the media over the last, I would say, year and a half. We invested quite a bit of capital into a site, and it's on the east coast of the U.S. We call it Proving Grounds. And it really folds into our first strategy around new product development. From a Cobb perspective, probably the last really successful introduction in a big way of a product was in the mid-'80s for Cobb, the Cobb 500, which is a great small bird package or a lighter weight package in the U.S. today. So why has new product introduction been more limited? I would argue there hasn't been a really good infrastructure to test and validate products in a scalable way where customers can get really confident in the data that they want to look at ahead of time of utilizing and putting the product down. So we took one of our existing sites, again, it's in the Delmarva region on the East Coast, invested constructing a number of new barns, retrofitting a number of new barns, and basically I'd call it a small production pyramid where it has great-grandparents, grandparent production, and then ultimately a fairly significant number of parent stock. As you go through this, for example, if we want to test a new female product, we can test about 40,000 females at a time, twice a year, through this new facility. And half of that product may be dedicated to a test female and the other half to a female we know a lot about to serve as a baseline. Or it could be a male. Just depends on where we're at in our new product development timeline. So we get a huge amount, more than ever before in the industry, breeder data first and foremost for us to get confident in. And if it looks like a product that is street worthy, data that we can share with customers ahead of time. Also, it generates a large number of broiler eggs. So customers always want to know about the broiler data. A lot of that they can generate themselves if we can provide them with a test population of broilers to place. So we can generate about 100,000 broiler eggs per week for customers to utilize and have a look at. It goes further than that. We have our own broiler testing facilities that we pass a portion of those to, so we grow the broilers out, test them for all the important traits of growth rate, livability, feed conversion. And then we have a processing facility in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It's actually the University of Arkansas's processing facility. So we can harvest a sizable number of birds. We share that every day with them. And we're harvesting birds in there every day where we can hand debone. It's digital data collection platform, so we can quickly get the data back into our database to assess that. And then also something that is very unique, I think, to Cobb, and something we have taken advantage of in a very sizable way over the last year and a half. Cobb is wholly owned by Tyson Foods. So, our genetics do go to Tyson, but Tyson has some other assets that we have really tapped into that have helped us for our global genetic improvement program. And one of those is a better understanding and characterization of all things around meat quality. So when we harvest those birds that come through the processing facility, we send a portion of those samples over to the Tyson Discovery Center, and the food science team there does a very thorough evaluation of the treatments that we provide, and then that information gets passed back. That's really a unique opportunity for us as being owned by an integrator with those sorts of abilities. So all of that information bundled up together gives us a really good look. Is a product that we want to that we think we want to go to market with, does it pass all of our tests first before we want to go to a customer with it?
It's interesting because as you develop product, you have the facilities and the capacity to run that product all the way through its life cycle and learn, not rely on a grower to grow that product for you, to get you the data that you guys want as a company that's important to you to make your decisions on. That's putting a lot of control to the uncontrollable in the R&D space.
Yeah, it is. There's another thing that's really important to that. As we're getting ready to enter with newer and different products, we also want to be able to show up with a playbook of how to use that product down through the system. So whether it be what's the right weight guide for the females or males? What is there a lighting guide that's slightly different, or an incubation profile, or that type of facility allows us to have a better understanding of that and show up with a playbook for a more successful experience.
That's got to be very helpful for your growers as they have that curve to go off from and the baselines. That way they're not necessarily looking at maybe what other people are doing in the industry that are not as vested as Cobb is in the success of that bird. So at least it gives them a very, very good goal to shoot for.
That's our hope. That's our goal for that process.
So we've talked about birds. We've talked about Cobb. Let's talk about William just a little bit. This is a podcast about leadership, and you're in a position of leadership as a VP. I'm assuming you have a pretty good team around you. What is some traits of a good leader?
Well, first, I'm going to say I don't think there is a silver bullet for that. Hey, look, we're all different as individuals. We all have things where certain areas we're better at than others. For me, and again, this is just for me, but throughout my career, the thing that has helped me and the things I've been tasked with is being sure that my team, especially my direct team, I try and recruit people that are way smarter than me, that work hard and can execute at a very high level. That sounds very simple, but the most important thing that I'm involved with is hiring and recruiting. And so it's something that I spend a lot of time on down through the organization, not only when there are opportunities for like my direct reports. Conversely, if you don't, and let's say you're a good and smart leader, there aren't enough hours in the day to go down through the weeds and the details to go behind people and be sure things are getting done. So at Cobb, for example, we clearly have a lot going on, and we have to deliver on those things that we have going on. And so I have spent, certainly early on in coming into the role, of assembling the right group from across agricultural genetics that can perform at that level and do those things. And I don't think it matters whether you're leading an R&D organization or the entirety of a business, or if you're a production manager working across several sites and depending on people to get things done. For me, that's been very critical. There's a lot of other things that are important, I suppose, but for me to execute and create change in a business, that's been throughout my career the most important.
As we wrap this up, because there's a lot going on today, what's one last thing that you can share with the future leaders of this industry?
It's going to be an exciting time. And I'm going to say this from a livestock and poultry perspective in general. Globally, as we look across some uncharted waters across the species, we're here in Dallas, Texas. A lot of the conference has probably a little heavier on the beef side, which, well deserved, and it's always interesting to track. Beef in the U.S. is living through a really interesting time of incredibly low cow inventory, and I'd argue not super strong signals that that's going to increase. All-time high multiples of live prices, which, if you're making calves on the front side, that's a great deal. My point is that ultimately downstream, that's created a increased cost to the consumer, which is all fine and good, but it changes the dynamics across the protein consumption space. I think it ultimately means for chicken that there'll be continued growth and expansion globally to maybe offset some of that. I mean, chicken's going to be produced at a lower cost as a unit of production relative to beef. You've got pork somewhere in between that's still dealing with the supply-demand, off balances with ASF and other dynamics. So how that future looks exactly is, I think really unclear, but it is going to be an interesting time. I do think when it comes to poultry production, there'll be continued growth and expansion across the world incrementally, and it'll be a great and fun industry to work in.
Well, William, I really appreciate your time. Listeners, most of the time we spend talking about eggs and egg production and other things, but you got to remember the barnyard's got lots of different species. When we're talking agriculture, we're talking ag tech, it's exciting to see folks coming together and trying to solve problems, trying to help farmers, because there is so many different types of technologies, from drone technology to, there's all kinds of different ones here that are kind of exciting. Never realized I'd see a GPS collar on a cow, but it makes sense when you start to look at things. So poultry listeners, thank you. Please share this podcast with your friends, family, and the rest of the industry. Have a great day.